Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the event. Just waiting for a couple more people to come online there, and we'll get started very shortly. Thanks very much. Yeah, Caroline, that session will be recorded. Thanks very much. We normally upload it onto our YouTube page afterwards. We'll be sending out links for that afterwards. Thanks very much. Okay, well, look, thanks everybody for attending today. We seem to have a number of people here. Thanks very much for joining today, and welcome to you all. My name is Mark Davenport, and I'm head of the PMO Community of Practice, and just started the role this year. I'm delighted to be part of the role. And I suppose what I can say about the PMOs and what we're trying to do this year is we're looking to sort of like see how we can achieve excellence in PMOs over the year. I suppose this year our primary focus is going to be fostering a culture of continuous improvement, innovation with the community, and we have some key goals, and they are around knowledge sharing, professional development, networking, and innovation. So throughout the year, we plan to have 4 events, and this is the first of these events for all the PMI members and others. And it's going to be 2 in person and 2 online. So we've got a few interesting events planned coming up. An interesting event around it's to do with hopefully around the practice guide and how that's going to work, the new PMO practice guide, and also then we're also looking at one around a questionnaire that's going out, a survey on PMOs, working with Auxilian on that. So that's hopefully that'll be good for the year for all of us, and hopefully looking forward to you all to be involved and collaboration with yourselves throughout this year. So today our event is being hosted by Auxilian. Thanks very much for their sponsorship, and we're being joined here now by Sean from Aerogen, and Aerogen are the PMI Ireland Chapter of the Year award winners for the PMO of the Year, and I suppose this gives you an idea of how Aerogen's journey to success, and it's going to give a bit. Sean will give you an idea of how the strategies, best practices, and lessons learned throughout that program. So I'm delighted to introduce Sean here now, and he's the PMO director of Aerogen, and hopefully you'll be interested to hear what he has to say. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Mark, and listen, really appreciate the opportunity to meet with the audience today, and it's just a fantastic opportunity, I think, in terms of building up that community practice and sharing insights. And I'm keen to learn here as well from the audience. And I think one thing to say at the outset is that we'll go through the slide deck in a few moments in terms of our approach to the PMO within Aerogen, but also we were really deeply honoured and gratified to receive the award last year. It was fantastic for the team here. But also want to say that we don't claim to be the oracle of all things PMO or PM. I think we're always on that journey regarding what function you're in, what business you have, the organisation you operate within. So we're learning too, and we're always on that continuous journey. So what I'll do, I'll take you to the slide deck, and listen, looking forward to the conversation. Any questions or comments folks may have, may welcome that. So let me just share the deck here now. We'll get underway. Yes, can folks see that there? Yeah, so we'll get underway. So,
yeah, we can.
So it's a bit of background in terms of Aerogen, folks who might be familiar with the company. So we're a medical device company, which is also branching out into the pharma world at the moment in terms of Aerogen Pharma. We're headquartered in Galway, so the world leader in acute care aerosol drug delivery. In operation about 25 years, started over a butcher shop in Moycullen by our CEO, John Power, who's a visionary entrepreneur and a fantastic sponsor in terms of our PMO, so we're very fortunate in that regard. Products have treated nearly 20 million patients, 75 countries worldwide, and the product that's kind of key for our business is our Aerogen solar vibrating mesh nebulizer. So that is the gold standard in terms of respiratory care. So I won't dwell too long on Aerogen because obviously we're here to talk about PMOs in general. I've tried to keep the slide deck reasonably applicable to the audience here, but just to share perhaps a short video that might be useful to folks to understand a little bit about Aerogen and our business. So let me go here full screen. Okay, so hopefully that gives folks a little bit of insight in terms of Aerogen. I'll send some links in the presentation afterwards in terms of further information if folks want to delve deeper. And also just call out in terms of Aerogen's also expanding into the Aerogen pharma business in terms of our pharmaceutical companies. So at the moment, we're currently the largest indigenous medical device company within Ireland, and the pharma business is the next stage in our evolution, and the PMO are trying to assist in terms of that particular growth and development. So moving on. So headquarters goal, as I said, and the role of our PMO. So I guess when we started the PMO up originally, we were very careful in terms of making sure that we didn't try and impose a solution on an already existing successful business. And we spent a lot of time in terms of making sure we were very much benefits led, that we were enabling portfolio development and delivery for the actual leadership team in the business to drive it forward, and that there was a lot of strategic alignment within it. So we spent a lot of time when we initiated the PMO, and we had a sponsor at senior leadership level to start understanding what the pain points were in the business, what the opportunities were, what the culture was around project management, and then right-size our PMO to meet those needs. The scale and impact, we're currently about 500 employees. There's about 20 project management professionals growing at the moment, hiring again this year throughout our PMO group. And our projects typically vary. So within the strategic realm, about 50 projects per annually. And then we have projects within continuous improvement, sustaining activity, excuse me, and also commercial activity. So there's a wide variety in terms of the type of projects that come to the PMO and the other functions within the business. So as I said, we were founded in 2021. Initially, the PMO was brought on board to assist with setting it up. And I guess one of the first things I said was very useful to us is that we had a very strong sponsor on the leadership team. And that was fantastic because it means that we were set up for a degree of success in terms of having a keen advocate who saw a need for the PMO, but also there was an education piece there as well for myself and for the leadership team and the other functional heads and leaders within the business to understand, well, what's the PMO going to do for us? What's its role? What's its responsibilities? The what's in it for me piece. And we were very keen to position ourselves in terms of portfolio enablement. That was kind of our calling card in terms of making life easier for everyone, more efficient, more productive in terms of how we deliver on our projects within the portfolio. What pain points could we remove in terms of drags, and what kind of strategic projects need a high degree of cross collaboration, resource planning, prioritization, interdependency between different projects, understanding the dynamics around that. And at this stage, we've now expanded to include NPD, new product development, P&OD, compliance projects, operations, and engineering projects. So we built upon that success, but I guess the founding piece of all of that was listening and making sure that we understand very clearly where the pain points were in the business, what the drags were, and could we get some early wins to show that we're actually adding value to the PMO in terms of its delivery. And also position ourselves in terms of what people's perceptions might be about PMO. So when you go into a new business, especially setting up a new PMO, people might have, understandings or conceptions in terms of previous businesses they worked in, how PMOs operate. Some are quite bureaucratic, some are quite rules based. And we want to make sure that we weren't becoming a drag on business delivery, that we were going to help enable the portfolio delivery piece for Aerogen. So that was very, very important for us. So in terms of the governance prioritization impact, one area that we spent a huge amount of time is in terms of structured project selection. And when we initially set the PMO, one thing I wanted to do was to make sure that the leadership team had a shared sense of value. So whether if you were in regulatory or science and medical affairs or operations, engineering, new product development, whatever area you're coming from, that there was a shared value understanding between that leadership team. And that's important because obviously that leadership team owned the resources, they're writing the checks in terms of which projects get approved, and they also have a view in terms of governance. And we wanted to make sure there was alignment across that group first in terms of what that value appreciation was. So as part of that, we developed a scoring model, and that scoring model has criteria that are weighted differently. We agreed that with the leadership team in terms of, well, how do you appreciate value within the portfolio? So is it around, financial return? Is it risks, which I like to call threats in terms of portfolio? What strategic alignment criteria you have? So we have a number of those. They are then weighted in terms of how the leadership team view those, and then we score all our projects against those. So all projects, as we know, have inherent value. There's value in projects, but it's the relative value from one project to another. So which ones you're going to resource and prioritize is important. And with any business and organization, resources are always finite. Capacity and capability versus the demand tend perhaps not to be fully aligned. I've always found that there's always more projects than there are people to do them. So you have to pick the winners. And that's why I wanted to make sure that the leadership team had a holistic, unified view of value. And therefore, that could be then distilled down to the next tier of the organization. So everyone was seeing off the HAME sheet, and you could draw a dotted line for no matter what project you were working on, right up to the overall strategy of the organization, and it was truly adding value. So no pet projects, no functional solo runs, making sure they were all aligned. And that helped also break down a lot of barriers in terms of, what one function might value versus another, and it kind of broadened the lens of all the leadership team, I think, in the system, come to that alignment. So that was a very useful exercise. And we spent quite a lot of time doing that. We saw a lot of value in it in terms of setting the PMO up for success. In terms of portfolio management, we categorize all our projects. We found that very useful. So what we do is we try and get resource and prioritization in lane. So we have strategic projects, we have continuous improvement, sustaining type projects, which is, keeping lights on, product out the door, paying for the bills here and today. And then we have commercial enablement projects. So we categorize our projects in those work streams as such, and then we try to make sure that we understand the interdependencies and that we have a high level portfolio planning where we allocate resources. So what we try and do is we try to do an element of ring fencing around certain SMEs and certain populations of talent within Aerogen. And the idea of doing that is that, number one, you have a finite pool, you don't want to over allocate, but when you do allocate, you want to make sure that those resources are correctly allocated and stay with the project that they've been assigned to. So we want to make sure we weren't robbing Peter to pay Paul as such. That was an important part of getting that in place. And that also helps take out any kind of positive tension in the system between competing functions or competing projects, that everyone understands the rules of the game in terms of resource allocations and what those allocations need to be. And it's an understanding that there has to be a prioritization piece within that. Next thing we looked at was in terms of governance and performance tracking. So we put in quite a robust governance process in terms of the portfolio and measuring, but also making sure that people were aligned with that before we implemented it. So a lot of conversations with all stakeholders at all different levels, really, of the organization over a couple of months before we officially went live with the PMO. And number one is you understand the pain points, you understand people's concerns and where they're coming from. I guess the second thing was useful for us setting up the PMO was that the very act of outreaching into the company and asking people for their input, asking people for what they would like to receive from PMO, asking them what their pain points are, asking them where there were opportunities around processes or systems. The act of doing that also builds up coalition, right? So you get people on side, People understand you're there to assist in terms of delivery. You're not there to be a bureaucratic organization. You're there to as a partner to portfolio enablement. You're not deciding prioritization. You're not deciding what goes in the portfolio. That is not our role in the PMO here. We are here to assist in benefits-led approach for delivery, and that's where we're coming from. So our tiered framework typically runs from a core team. We have a function manager who reviews his PMs or her PMs in terms of tracking to adherence and schedule and quality and cost and the standard KPIs that we use. We then have a tier 3, like a steering committee, which you might be familiar with that term, in terms of an overall focus lens in terms of key projects that the PMs present with SMEs when required on their project health scorecards. And then we have an escalation pathway up into the XLT, which is our senior leadership team, for any issues that may require further expertise or insight or direction or decision making from them. But we're very keen that we don't escalate ad nauseum. We make sure that the PMs and teams are trying to resolve issues and threats and roadblocks at their level first, and we give insight and expertise around that. And again, that steering committee is very useful when we put it in place, because again, you're pulling functional leads from different areas and you're driving that level of accountability and ownership and responsibility, and that's very important. So we find that while you can put in all the rules of a good PMO, what the architect should be around governance and prioritization and tools and templates and training, and all that is really useful. And following the PM buck and different methodologies in terms of project delivery, the behaviors is also a huge part in terms of an effective working portfolio-led culture. So we try to promote that in all our languages and presentations, and we touch back to it all the time in conversation during meetings around accountability, responsibility, ownership. If you see an issue, might necessarily be in your wheelhouse, but what can you do to resolve it? So that kind of solution-oriented mindset that really, really helps in terms of portfolio delivery, coupled with all the other good stuff in terms of structured project selection, good portfolio management, good governance and tracking, and also making sure that you firewall the portfolio. So it's really important that the PMO is quite robust in saying no to projects that are not in line with the strategy of the company, and make sure that anything that comes into the pipeline is really, really adding value. It has to stand on its own 2 feet in terms of a robust challenge from the leadership team, from the tier 3 governance, which is the functional leads, to make sure it's adding value. And we have a structured process around that in terms of how we charter our projects, how we do the scorecard and modeling on them in terms of assigning value to those projects. There's also financial critique that we involve in terms of doing that. And then tier 3, which is our kind of mid-tier steering committee type review board, they will also challenge in terms of which projects get green lighted before we actually take them to full leadership approval. And the other piece of that as well, just to add, is that after projects are approved and go into kind of a candidate status, we also do detailed planning. And then we sanity check back in terms of the original ask of the organization. Is it still in line with what that planning workshops have generated? So, are there new risk issues, or new assumptions? Is it extended duration now? Has external factors changed? Maybe the regulatory landscape has changed. Maybe there's a new competitor in the market, whatever it might be. But is the ask still the same? And we keep that business lens, because sometimes once a project gets started, it can very much get a life of its own, and off it goes through in our process, a design stage gate type process. If they get a life of their own, perhaps companies sometimes don't check back and make sure that the business case is still valid. Because for a medical device company, and particularly when you're going through regulatory bodies like FDA, etc., and MDR, it's quite a long lead time between starting off, for instance, a new product as to when you actually sell it in the commercial world. And things can change during that time period, and it's beholden on the PMO in terms of protecting the portfolio, protecting the resource pool, that business lens is challenged at stage gates throughout the process. Does it still make sense to spend our money, our resources, our time on this particular project? So we're very keen to push that. Just to mention the KPIs and OKRs, this is something we're taking a more proactive lens this year. So KPIs, which most people are familiar with, I think, key process indicators around in terms of a little bit of the here and now, a little bit more operational in nature. But we are looking to introduce OKRs this year, which are kind of objective key results, so people are familiar with those. There's a lot of information online, folks, and researching, but OKRs for us are about continuous improvement and an evolution. So a typical OKR might be a metric around the number of times the critical path in the schedule is changing. Another OKR might be in terms of the number of projects that are delayed but have risk response plans in place and under active ownership and leadership and being progressed. So to try and have the here and now piece, but also to evolve in terms of performance and delivery from the OKR piece, the objective key results. That's been a key thing for us this year. We want to keep kind of pushing on. So how we drive alignment. So in terms of, excuse me, in terms of integration, so our PMO tries to take a very broad lens. We are housed within NPD originally, but we also have outreach now into operations, IT, reg, quality, commercial, science, and the Medicare functions. So we are looking in terms of that broader, high-level view in terms of the PMO architecture and how we put sustainable processes and systems and structures in place, governance prioritization around those various functions, and particularly how projects get into the system, because once they're in, it can be difficult to get them out, right? So we try and make sure that we have that good firewall piece in place and that all the functions, again, have this shared sense of value. They understand what each of the strategic objectives are, and there's kind of a uniformity of approach. So one thing we do in terms of each year is we have a number of sessions where all the functions present on their strategic objectives for the year. And that's been really, really helpful. So it builds up those connection points between the different function leaders, but it also gives a broader lens to those functions as well. So they understand the other perspective more holistically, and they can work together then better in terms of when they start looking at resource allocation and prioritization, and there's a sense to it in terms of that we're all in it together. In terms of PMs, so again, with all good companies, we try and hire fantastic talent, and Aerogen, we're very lucky in that regard. But we also have training on site, mentorship. We have standard methodologies in terms of improving our execution and delivery. So we work through that on a regular basis, and we try to have a broad umbrella in terms of that PM expertise. They don't necessarily have to be housed in the PMO. We have project leaders who are from engineering, who are from quality, who are from compliance, from different functions. But as they're leading a project, there are minimum skill sets and expertise and experience we try and develop within those individuals to make them more successful in their roles. And again, it's about making them more successful, making sure the business is more successful in terms of delivery. So it's to raise that collective knowledge of project management and how it should be done. Transparent communication is really important for us. Again, regular governance meetings. So we spend quite a bit of time on that in terms of making sure we understand the health of the overall portfolio. We do that online, we do it in face. We have different variations of updates depending on exactly what the nature of the project is. And as I said, we do a lot of cross-function alignment sessions. So particularly around when we're looking at budgeting and also in terms of resource allocations for the coming years. So typically we try and get that done in a Q3 type timeline for the following year. We're looking at 12, 18 months in terms of what projects are coming forward and how we need to resource those. So again, it's just that constant communication piece, and I can't overstate that in terms of the value of open and honest dialogue and communication and being very transparent about what the strategic priorities are for the business. So that we get that from XLT, which is fantastic, our senior leadership team, and then distilling that down throughout all the various tiers of the organization. So everybody's really, really well aligned in terms of what it is we're about in terms of delivery. So in terms of cultural impact, so again, kind of touching this a little bit. So in terms of knowledge management, so we have a process here in terms of our lessons learned and portfolio enablement. So one thing we're key to is that my own experience in the past is that sometimes we do projects, particularly their extended duration, and you might do lessons learned perhaps at the end of the project, and it could be 18, 24 months out before you started, and people's recollections are different. You're moving on to the next project, your eyes off the ball, it's on something else. So we try and have regular, as part of our core team meetings on a monthly basis. Then we also look at, well, what lessons have we learned? And this year we're putting a lot of emphasis around metrics in terms of if we have a lesson learned, that we had an issue or threat that arose, and then we had to respond to it. What lesson do we learn? And then what have we done in terms of the business to make sure that lesson or that learning is embedded? So if the process or a system update or whatever it might be, have we actually taken an action on it? So we're metricizing that now rather than having it in terms of a document that sits somewhere online or on someone's bookshelf in terms of here's all the lessons learned, and it just sits there and gathers dust. And we don't actually learn from it. So we're looking to try and progress that forward this year and make sure we're in that evolution, that OKR piece I spoke about in terms of continuous improvement. So one example that this year would have been, or last year would have been in terms of our meeting effectiveness. So we kind of took a very stringent lens in terms of the cost of meetings in-house, the number of meetings, what their purpose were, how many people were attending meetings, what functions were calling meetings, what value were we getting from them, behaviors, before meetings, during meetings, after meetings, etc., and what the etiquette was around them. So we kind of look at those in terms of meetings are great, but they're also a cost on the business, how they help in portfolio delivery, and then are people sitting in meetings when they should be out actually helping deliver the portfolio. So that was a simple example, but it's in that space in terms of trying to progress things in terms of how the business operates. Another piece around it, again, we touched on this, is around the accountability piece, like huge for me in terms of people stepping up and owning issues and owning delivery at all levels of the organization, and they understand there's a cost to not having that accountability, not having that ownership, and to be very much solution orientated. So if you're coming with a problem or an issue, the expectation from a PMO point of view and from all the leadership here, that you're also coming with options. You're coming with proposals. You're coming with a lens. You've reached out to the functions, and you're trying to kind of move through those issues in a proactive way. And that's really helpful in terms of delivery. It's also really helpful in terms of repeating mistakes and learnings from previous projects and programs. So it's important that we keep that in it. And then in terms of the PM community itself, so we have a kind of a community of practice here in terms of the PM community in-house, and we also have our own PM Internet website. We share lessons, tips, interesting articles, guest speaking slots, etc. We do a lot of certification work in terms of PMs, and then we also have some social initiatives. And myself, I'm have a PM role within a local charity, so we try and reach out in terms of the we care attitude that we have in Aerogen in terms of what can we do outside our own business remit that brings our PM skill set to a wider audience. And it's good. So it's good in terms of you got that feel good factor, you feel you're adding value to your community, but also within your business as well. So we try and drive that through. So it's very much a cultural piece that's important not to neglect when you're trying to bring PMOs, especially from a standing start, into an organization. Because you can do everything else right, you can get everything in place, the governance, the structures, all of that, which is fantastic. And it does help, but you also need to really have an ear out for the culture of your business and making sure that's embedded in terms of the PMO. Otherwise, you won't be successful, or certainly you'll be challenged. So things of overcoming challenges in the future vision. So what kind of barriers or challenges do we have when we started up? So I guess one thing we had looked at when I joined was that not to be too presumptuous, not to bring your own biases into a new organization, and to really get to know the business, get to know the people, the products, how it takes, speak to everybody at all levels. So I think when I joined originally, I spent at least 3 to 4 months just one-to-ones, FaceTime, structured surveys, looking at businesses, processes, systems of different functions, where the points were, what was of interest to the leadership team, what were their values, what were the things that they were interested in progressing, what was causing them difficulty or pain within their own business units, and then saying, right, well, that's kind of the villains, right? Let's call it that. Now we want to be the hero. So what's the PMO going to do in terms of that hero structure? And the other piece that was important in terms of that resistance piece, and everything goes to a change curve as you bring something in use, but the change management within this is making sure you remove any confusion. So if you work in the marketing world, you sometimes hear the phrase, confused minds don't buy. So you want to make sure that the audience, your customers, which is how we view in terms of our PMO internal, we have our customers, our stakeholders, what is it they understand about our PMO, and it's a complete clarity about what the PMO is about. So we want to make sure that was there. And when you have that, and you can clearly communicate then our roadmap, which we did, we developed a detailed roadmap for the PMO from inception right away to full deployment. Communicate it, look for feedback, park your ego. Okay, make sure you're very open to feedback. Look for it, value it, because it's fantastic. And when you get that feedback, it comes from a really good place, a lot of positive intent behind it, and that can really strengthen the potential of your PMO to add value and be very successful. Scaling, so we had to scale quite quickly in terms of hiring. So we had a lot of activities with our P&OD team to make sure we had the right skill set coming in, and that change management piece I just spoke about there, and the cultural alignment, just having an awareness of that and how to do good change management within the organization, particularly with a PMO. It's going to touch every facet of the business, and it's going to interact with all the function leads, all of the leadership team, and can be very impactful in a positive way, but also the opposite also applies if not done correctly. And then in terms of future outlook, so we're constantly trying to look forward to the next year and see how can we evolve it further. And the OKRs are kind of a big focus this year. Accountability is a big focus for this year in terms of further strengthening that culture within the business, but also a lot more let's say, forensic metrics around delivery, particularly around that continuous improvement piece. KPIs are really useful, but you also want to start putting a lot more of the OKRs into the business as well in terms of delivery. Some of this, again, is around planning, so it's kind of just to cover it. So I know a lot of folks are going to know this on the call, but just to kind of go through for us at a general level, what we found in terms of, what was our key pillars for success. So for me, in terms of all our projects within the organization, so, clear goals, clear deliverables, we understand the constraints, the assumptions at the start, good project initiation and evaluation. Okay, make sure it's really robust, that shared sense of value, that firewalling portfolio to make sure we understand what it is we're being asked to do, why we're being asked to do it, and what it's going to take to get it done. And having that broader lens. An engaged sponsor is huge, particularly for our PMO. We have a very active sponsor who is a great advocate for the PMO. And that has also helped us in terms of the leadership team in terms of understand the value of the PMO, and they've been fantastic in terms of resourcing and coming on board with the vision of the PMO as well, because they see value in it and there's benefits accruing from it. So that's hugely powerful. If you don't have a strong sponsor and there isn't a buy-in from the senior leadership team in terms of the PMO, you will struggle to be successful, I would feel. So I think that's an important piece to make sure you do have and that you cultivate if you don't have it. And then in terms of the project level, very important things like kick-off meetings, shared visions and goals of the project, understanding the scope, make sure the PMs are really skilled in terms of doing that, understanding everyone's role, responsibility within the actual project itself. We have a lot of time in terms of planning, and so again, one area that we can really emphasize is not to rush through planning. So the temptation is you get your project brief or charter signed off, you get resource, and then you're off and running. And that is a mistake. So we try to make sure there's a lot of cross-function planning with the SMEs, and that we give it sufficient time. We don't rush it. We go at a pace, but we make sure it's done diligently and thoroughly, and we decompose the project into various manageable blocks of activity and understand it fully. And then we better understand then the ask of the team, and if there's a misalignment between what we had originally requested from leadership in terms of resourcing or time or what the output's going to be, and then we recalibrate and we go back to leadership with that feedback. And again, early buy-in, right? So stakeholder alignment. So again, I kind of beating this drum a little bit here on the call, but stakeholder alignment really important. So keeping them appraised, understanding who your stakeholders are, so mapping them out in terms of our stakeholders. We do that at a regular basis in terms of the influence, the power, what's the level of communication style they'd like to have, how often these be involved, etc. So all the PMs are tasked in terms of doing that within their own projects as well. So that planning piece, those kind of three kind of tranches work well for us, different for different businesses, but it works well in Aerogen. Selecting the right approach. So in terms of project planning, so a lot of our particular NPD, new product development projects, typically will go through waterfall due to the nature of a stage gate process within medical device pharma. We do also have elements of agile and a hybrid approach. So I think one thing I would say with the PMO, and some people can be very, maybe have an evangelical approach. Everything must be agile, or everything must be waterfall, or a combination of above or other iterations. So the view I have on it personally is that you pick what works right for the particular project. I'm pretty agnostic in terms of what people pick. We train people to the tools. We give them clear guidance in terms of how these planning frameworks operate. And then we have a level of trust in terms of our experienced PMs as to which one they're going to use for a particular project. So again, it's to make sure that we have that broader lens, because every business is different, every function is different, and projects sometimes kind of very different criteria around how you should manage them to get the best effect. So we make sure we're really dynamic in that approach. So key risks, I guess, common planning pitfalls, we kind of touched on some of this stuff. Again, unclear requirements, from the start, what's the ask, unclear objectives, scope creep, being very vigilant towards that, and making sure that we don't sleepwalk into scope creep and suddenly what you're providing is not what someone wanted, or someone thought they were getting something else, and then you have disappointed stakeholders, you have costly overruns, and it's not effective way. So we're very punchy, I guess, in terms of, again, firewalling, but also when something does come through and is approved, that we really make sure the scope is tightened down. And if there is any change to scope required, it has to go through a formal approval process before it's signed off on, and that we can do that, because obviously it impacts in terms of the overall resource pool. And as we all say in our meetings, if you pick to do this project or increase the scope of this project, you're not doing something else. So you got to figure out in terms of what's the value to the business. lack of risk management. So I guess for us, I think this the engagement piece I won't labour too much more. I think we spoke about that sufficiently, but overly optimistic timelines is what I do want to comment on. So I think PMs and people by general nature are optimists, right? I think as a species we are optimistic by nature, but within project management that's not an advantage. It's actually quite a disadvantage. So we want to make sure that all our project timelines are very realistic, and that we are setting targets of why they may be stretch, and we want to keep positive tension in the system, but they are achievable, right? So we want to make sure that we're realistic in terms of that. Things like ignoring dependencies, be them within a project or external to other projects, or outside environments in terms of the landscape we operate within, not adapting to changes quickly, poor communication, lack of monitor control during the execution. All of those kind of risk management pieces, again, I'm sure folks here are very familiar with it, but they're all things that we spend a lot of time keeping on our radar and trying not to forget them. Poor resource allocation, huge one for us. Initially, we started the PMO within Aerogen was just to understand resource allocations and to make sure when we had that shared sense of value and we had that alignment around what the portfolio had to be comprised of in terms of projects, that we really understand that we had a broad church portfolio planning sessions, which we still do with all the function leads. We allocate headcount to the work streams, and then from that, then we allocate to individual projects. So to try and hold that accountability around prioritization so that strategic projects and commercial projects can live happily together and they're resourced adequately. So we do spend a lot of time around that resource planning piece. And also in terms of a threat around this planning is around quality planning, the voice of the customer piece. So particularly with NPD, as an example, in terms of new products. So really understanding the marketing requirements from commercial, from the customer, from the different use environments, how the products are going to be used, handled, everything with supply chain, purchase, all of that is really well detailed within our marketing requirements documentation, so that when we do finally lock down in terms of project lock-in, we understand what the ask is very clearly. And sometimes that's a challenge because there might be some opaqueness around what's going to be developed for a particular customer niche or requirement. But we spend a lot of effort in that because we find it adds value in terms of being more predictable around the output, and that way our stakeholders are satisfied with the final end result. So risk management best practices. So in terms of threats, I prefer the word threat to risk. So we do a lot of effort, our PMs. So we are all trained in terms of SWOT analysis, brainstorming, historical data. We lean on SMEs. So in terms of that community practice piece, it's really useful. We're brainstorming. So new projects that arise, experienced PMs with expertise and skill sets, partnering up with other PMs who have been assigned a new project and kind of sharing their knowledge, sharing their real world experience in terms of how projects like that operate within the business here. So that's really useful, okay, and creating that kind of personal connection between the project manager. We're very lucky that we're on site here in terms of 3 different facilities in Shannon and Parkmore and Dangan and Galway, so we can have that level of intimacy, which really does help. Engaging the stakeholders, it's really important, and analysing past projects. That goes back to this kind of lesson learned piece in terms of looking past it, because sometimes with NPD particularly and other business units, sometimes the projects aren't night and day, right? So there's a lot of similarity at times, particularly if they're going through perhaps a stage gate process. So there are learnings to be learned from other projects that are in a similar wheelhouse. It's not that every project is night and day. My experience, they tend not to be, but they're an evolution perhaps in various areas. Risk assessment, so really important in terms of the risk register of the PMs, that they have all that documentation, their red logs, risk assumptions and dependencies and decisions. So we look at what are the assumptions being made of this project, what dependencies do we have, what external factors are in there, have you categorized the risks? If you have categorized the risk, going through your RACI, making sure you understand the probability of the impact, what's the mitigation plan, have you got clear owners for it, if you're in delay, have you got the risk remediation to make sure we get back on plan, who owns it, clear ownership responsibility. That whole cultural piece, again, huge when it comes to threat, right? People having that on their radar in terms of thinking all the time, and we're peppering it in the conversations with the teams around, what if scenarios, what could happen here, what if this threat happens, do we need something that kind of mitigates that issue or threat before it arises, etc. So that's very much something part of the normal conversation as we're going through project initiation and planning and then into execution. So it's always live, and we always make sure it's live during our core team meetings where we take a look at the risk register. What are the top risks? Anything that we need to do here, guys? Move on. So we're keeping it peppered all the time. So I spoke about this, so the categorization, so I won't labor this one too much. So again, types of risk that we have, so we make sure we have that included. What's probably an impact. So we use qualitative and quantitative methods around that, and then the prioritization matrix, like a heat map basically. So we see which ones we have to go after first, which ones we just got to keep on our radar, but which ones we need to actually go at now, otherwise they're going to threaten in terms of our schedule adherence. So again, the risk mitigation strategies, again, these are standards. So I think most of the audience here would be aware of these. So risk avoidance, okay. How do you transfer it? Okay, outsource the risk. Nanny mitigation and acceptance. So for a lot of us, in terms of avoidance and mitigation and acceptance. So it's in that bracket where most of our threats tend to fall. But again, it's just peppering it all the time, making sure you're holding the PMs and teams accountable to it, making sure they understand there's going to be live conversation at our governance boards in terms of show me your risk register, what are your top 3 threats, what are you doing about them, what are your issues, what are you doing about them, have you got clear ownership, have you got a response plan, just proactive all the time, and just to keep that moving in a kind of energetic, solution-orientated way. Stakeholder engagement, again, this is really important, particularly at the onset of the PMO. So I invested a lot of personal time in this myself in terms of mapping out who all the stakeholders were within the business and really going out of my way to get to know them and get to know them at a personal level in terms of how they like to operate, understand their concerns, their issues, the pain points they're dealing with, what's of interest to them, what do they view as a win from the output of a successful PMO, and then also tailoring your communication style and format to that particular stakeholder. So that's been really useful in terms of building that coalition of support around the PMO, and it's valued, I know, on the other side as well in terms of those stakeholders. So they certainly feel engaged and part of the journey, and we continue to do that all the time. So that's something we don't stop. We keep doing it all the time at regular intervals. We take the temperature a few times a year in terms of whether the PMO is meeting the expectations of our key stakeholders. So that's something that I would encourage anyone who start to do a PMO, is that you really invest that time up front, but not a once off. You got to keep that going all the time. So again, little tools on this. I think folks here will probably be feeling a lot of this. So the power interest grid, we do a lot of stakeholder identification, I've spoken that, and also we tailor our approach in terms of who those stakeholders are and how they like to be communicated with. So I've covered that. Conflict and resistance. So look, this is kind of part of the course in terms of, you'll always have perhaps different lines of opinion, perhaps not everyone's converging on the same thing, but making sure we identify them really early through proactive engagement, because everyone comes from a good place. In my experience, people want to do a great job, they want to be involved, they want to deliver something successful for their business, and it's coming from a good place, right? So just to find the positive within that, and then in terms of having the PM skill set, which is a soft skill set at times in terms of how to build that affinity, how to work with people who have a different approach or different communication style, but also to be respectfully direct, I would say, in terms of any behaviors or any kind of practices that perhaps aren't aligned in terms of good project management and good delivery. And those conversations can be done respectfully, one-to-one, typically is better, and to build up those relationships. I think people respect that. They respect good feedback, they respect open, honest communication. We certainly try not to sugarcoat anything here in terms of our project reviews. Also in our one-to-ones, we make sure we are very transparent and work proactively with all the stakeholders and all the team members. So again, that does work very well for us, and it's something that we pepper in the conversation and training also with the PMs who are leading a lot of our teams. Communication practices, again, I kind of touched on this. So transparent communication, really transparent, warts and all, the good stuff, the bad stuff, everything comes up, right? And we tend to spend more time talking about the stuff that may be dragging on delivery rather than the stuff that's going really well. We try and balance it, but obviously your kind of attention tends to go to where there might be barriers or blockers in terms of the portfolio and getting it delivered. So we certainly make sure that it's done in a very open, fair, transparent way. We make sure that all the leadership team and our different steering committees and also our tier governments, that it's done in a helpful, proactive way. Those boards, those committees are there to help delivery. They're help to bring expertise, insight, experience. They're working in partnership with the project managers and with their teams. So it should be hand in glove. But also both sides of that equation hold each other accountable. So there's a a positive tension, let's call it that, between teams or project managers, for instance, give an example, who may have resource allocation that were provided and perhaps that's not fully coming through for whatever reason. Maybe there's some erosion in the prioritization at a functional level, and they can hold the managers accountable too. So we make sure we have that nice, free and open conversation, and that works really well. And people know it's the norm, right? It just becomes the norm. There's nothing negative about it. If anything, it's very positive. And the more you can get that into the culture of the organization, the better. So lots of two-way feedback, lots of tailored messaging. We spend a lot of time in that space. And the last one then here is in terms, and I won't claim to be an expert in any way in terms of AI, but we are looking at this. We have a digital transformation group within the business, and that's just been a fantastic addition in terms of how we're going to progress going forward. But we're looking now in terms of, well, how can PMO start tapping into that? So very early stages of this journey. So what I kind of look at in terms of what's the kind of more mundane tasks perhaps PMs do that sucks up time, be it in processes or systems or writing minutes or whatever it might be. Are there any AI tools that help some of that? And we have kind of started kind of dipping our toe into that water. Any kind of analytics we can use that gives us greater insight in terms of the portfolio, anything around resource allocations, any predictive analytics around what may happen in the future, the what if scenario planning. So that's important. Also want to look at in terms of having a very real-time single source of truth updates for leadership or any stakeholders at any given time, regardless of geography, time zone. They can just go in and see exactly where the whole portfolio sits, and they can also interrogate it to a degree. So we're looking at that. We have developed an in-house solution with our digitalization transformation team. We are also looking at PPM solutions that are perhaps more advanced as the business grows, particularly as we go into Aerogen Pharma over the next couple of years, and the business kind of takes that next jump up in terms of growth and development. And then looking in terms of any kind of risk detection that AI perhaps can give us. So there's a couple of different buckets we're looking at. I'm not an AI SME. I won't pretend to be one, but it is something I think that potentially can add value around the PMO and how it actually helps portfolio delivery. Lastly here is around data-driven decision making. So again, spoke about real-time dashboards. We do that in terms of all our projects within the portfolio in regards to what value stream they happen to sit within. KPIs, really, really heavy on the KPIs this year, but more particularly on the OKRs. So OKRs, as I said, being objectives and key results. So really about setting, ambitious goals for the organization and that evolution piece of the PMO. So, a typical KPI might be the here and now, tracking to a particular scheduled timeline. But an OKR is something like around the number of critical path changes in a quarter, the number of project delays reduced by X% over a time frame, standardized governance frameworks across all the projects. They're kind of more OKR territory. They're a bit more in terms of the evolution. So we want to kind of start putting more of those into the system, and then where they come out in the wash is actually in the KPIs. So the KPIs is kind of a little bit of a rear window. It's after the fact, where the OKR is a bit more future orientated and help protect in terms of the KPI scorecard. Future trends, I said, not going to go through it here on the AI piece, but I think there's certainly opportunity. I'm sure there's folks on the call who are far more proficient in this area than I, but I think it's something that's an opportunity for PMOs in general. But the bit that I think is always important, get the basics right, particularly if you're starting off a PMO from the start. Walk before you run. This area is huge opportunity for PMOs, but you got to have the other stuff right. The basic building blocks for really good PMOs we've spoken about here on the call. So I think that's really important. And that's basically it for myself, guys.
Sean, thanks very much for that. Very, very, very interesting, very informative. And you can see why you won the award. You and your team won the award last year. And I suppose that leads me into the first sort of question. I mean, someone has come up with there is just what tips would you give any PMOs thinking of applying for the 2025 National Project Awards?
I think for me, it's to think about your PMO in terms of benefits, right? So what value are you adding to the organization as a PMO? Can you clearly articulate that you're a strategic partner with your leadership team, with your C-suite team in terms of aiding and abetting in delivery portfolio? Do you have a strategic role within the PMO, or are you PMO that's a route checker? That's bureaucratic, that's tools, templates, training, which there's value in all of that, but I don't think it shifts you into the top tier of PMOs. So I think to have a strategic lens in your approach, And I guess in terms of, what differentiates your PMO perhaps from other businesses that are applying for the award as well, what's your unique selling point? And think about that in terms of if you were a customer and you're buying PMOs, right, and you know yourself what a great PMO looks like, does your PMO represent that? Have you really thought in terms of your stakeholders, your business, do they view you internally as a fantastic PMO? So it's really getting to know your organization. So, okay, well, are we at that level? Are we answering all those pain points? Do we understand what our remit is, and are we delivering upon it?
Thanks. And I suppose just leading on from that, questions there is, how many are in your team in the PMO? Question here now, how many in your team and their sort of experience and backgrounds they have?
Yes, so we've arranged, so in terms of our PMs, we try to have a gradient in terms of, we think about succession planning and developing new talent, because everyone brings different skill sets, particularly different generations coming through universities and college and different companies. So we try and make sure we have a broad range that come in. So we've arranged for senior program managers right down to junior PMs and senior PMs and PMs within that group. And we try and some projects require particular skill sets. You might have a PM perhaps who needs to be assigned to, let's say the digital transformation project. Let's say it's like an ERP type system, something like that. So a particular skill set that suits. Some of our pharma projects need a particular reg skill set or background in the PM. So we try and tailor it to that. More than other PMs are kind of more the general space in terms of supporting programs across the organization. So it varies, but we try to make sure that there's a gradient. And we try to also provide opportunities for people who are outside the PMO, right, that they can job rotate into our PMO, because they add really value. They add huge value because they come from other functions with a different lens and understand that function perhaps particularly well, better than the PMO to some extent, because they're working, they're living and breathing in that space. And they bring that skill set into PMO. So we try and provide that kind of career progression piece as well, because it's really useful and it's healthy.
Interesting. And we've got a few more questions here now. I'm just trying to pick up a few here now for you, Sean. You're going to get grilled here, I think, I'm afraid.
Okay. I might have all the answers.
Yeah, no, yeah, I mean, I had a few questions myself, but I'll ask the people on the call here. Someone wants to know what your most ambitious OKR is for this year.
I think for us, it's probably in terms of the lessons learned piece. I think is one that could be more challenging, because you have to dedicate time and space to do it, right? And it's not necessarily an immediate benefit to the project concerned there and then. It might be more a process or a system improvement that's a longer win for the organisation. So sometimes they can be a little more difficult to get traction on, because you need to allocate time and they're competing with the here and now. So for an OKR, I think that one's going to be more ambitious, but I think there's value in it, because long term it avoids repeating past kind of issues or walking into the same kind of difficult territory for projects within the portfolio. So I think that's a valuable one for us. The other one I think is going to be ambitious around the number of critical path changes, making sure we're very tight in terms of critical path and challenging that when the project team perhaps want to make an adjustment. And we have a metric around that as well. But there's lots of OKRs you can apply within PMOs, but I think they are really useful. I think they're more benefits led type lens, and I think they're a longer term win than the KPIs to some extent.
And I suppose following on a similar sort of question there is just just around have you. Sorry, I'm just reading. I just want to know how are the projects split? Are they split between the different agile, waterfall, hybrid? Have you got a sort of a percentage? Roughly?
Yeah, so I'd say with an NPD, the majority would be in traditional new product development, because they're going through a standard stage gate process that a lot of people in med device or pharma might be aware. As you move into the agile space, you're more in the end jobs world there in terms of iteration. So we try to do in our project planning as well, in order to set expectations with leadership as well, is around understanding where there are projects with a greater degree of opacity, that there are some buffers in there in terms of scheduled adherence around those. But we do, where we are using agile, we do kind of plug in number of iterations, for instance, around a particular cycle within that project. So we do have to give a line of visibility, because agile can't be there's no schedule, right? There's still an expectation from leadership. When are we done? Right, and that's a fair expectation. So while we do agile on more in the operation engineering space, I would say we still try and metricize it in terms of, okay, well, you might be in constant iterations to get to where you want to get. You're in the backlog and you're doing all the good Scrum framework, let's call it. But you still need to be schedule adherent. There still needs to be a commit from the teams, and we're very clear to drive that commitment piece, because sometimes agile, I feel, can, from experience, something can drift a bit into when are we finished, and that you just can't run your business that way. So we're careful. But I would say to that answer, MPD, I would think mostly traditional. Operation Angel is about 50-50 in terms of agile and traditional.
And just another question here, just around is any examples of charity work you've done with your PMs?
Yeah, so myself, I'm with Kelt, which is a local charity here in Galway, in terms of kind of getting back to nature. It's got a green kind of environmental aspect to it, so folks have to go online, they can see it. So I'm the director there in terms of the company secretary for that particular charity. Aerogen has a very strong we care philosophy. We do 1% in terms of all revenue, in terms of net, goes into charity locally. Our CEO, John Power, who's very entrepreneurial, but he's a huge social commitment in terms of local charities, organisations that are funded by Aerogen, and also in terms of some third world charities as well that he works on abroad. So that's very much an ethos, and it's grounded also in terms of just the nature of the products that we're in, right? We're in that acute care space. Our Aerogen Pharma project is in terms of a very neglected patient population in terms of premature babies, and how we can treat those with a new standard of care versus what's currently available to them. So the ethos that we care, that does permeate throughout the organization. People do have a direct connection in terms of what they do on a daily basis to the impact on the end customer, and we're quite close connection to that. So yeah, that is very much part of Aerogen's culture.
Well, Sean, so thanks very much there. We're sort of running tight on time here now, but I'd just like to say thanks very much, and congratulations again to you and your team for winning the PMO with the Weir Award. I'd just like to sort of have a couple of thanks here to yourselves, and also then to Auxilian for our sponsors for the community of practice this year. To Mariana, who's been in the background, our directors of events, and to all of you for joining. Just like to tell you a couple of things coming up now. We've an event coming up. It's an in-person event now. It's on the 26th of February. It's Unlocking the Creative Advantage, and it's sponsored by Gate One. So you go online there, onto our website, and you can have a look at that and join that. The PDO code, I think we have in there for you. And as I said now, I mean, just one other thing coming up there with our friends over in the PMO Global Alliance. They also have a event coming up later on this afternoon, also to do with PMOs. If anybody interested to go along to that there, I think there's a link for that there. We'll on the next page there, if you don't mind just jumping on, Mariana. Give you an idea on that one as well. And the other thing, as I said now, just thanks to everybody for coming along and joining today. Very resourceful information, and very thanks again, Sean, for the information you gave us. And as I said now, we'll be having a couple more events throughout the year on the practice guide, the new PMO practice guide, also on the PMO survey, and hopefully throughout the year we'll build on this community of practice, and we'll work together and achieve excellence along the way. Thanks very much, everybody.
Mark, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. Take care.
Thank you. Bye now.